Hello and welcome to Talk Local. I'm Helen Kaluzhny. Green energy, it's something that's been in the forefront of the political decision arenas recently, particularly over the past few years. The Provincial Green Energy Act has come into effect, and that's something that everybody has to deal with. But is green energy worth the cost? We're going to look at that issue tonight, and we would like to know what you have to think about this. You can give us a call at 893-6905. Send us a message at talklocal@rogers.com, or we're on Twitter at talklocalwr. Are you willing to pay extra for green energy? Are you willing to put out an extra cost? Should we be paying extra for energy that's provided back to the grid by private suppliers, homeowners who are selling it back to the grid for an increased cost? First up, though, there are a number of green energy programs out there. With a look at one of those programs, here's Talk Local's Sarah Monette.
Home builders in Kitchener have more reasons to build green, thanks to a new green housing incentive program launched by the City of Kitchener in partnership with Community Renewable Energy, Waterloo.
The Kitchener Green Housing Incentive Program, big long name, KGIP is what we like to call it. The idea is that we're trying to help new builders who build new homes to be able to build them better. Kitchener stepping up, they created this new housing incentive program, the KGIP, to be able to put a bit of money back in the hands of the builders to create the carrot, the stimulus, to draw them into the market and to give them a bit of a kickstart to do all the extra work that it takes to be able to build an advanced green home.
The city will spend about $500,000 on this program over the next few years.
This incentive program has levels. The way that it works is that the city is giving cash to the builder to do these advanced things. So it ranges between $2,000 and $5,000 for the first house the builder builds, and then that number goes down after they built a few of these. So it saves the city as much money as we can, but it respects that the builder has to learn how to do this. So first house the builder gets the most. By the third house, it's between $3,000 and $1,000 per house, depending on how advanced they are in their construction, which level of LEED they're building to, basically, whether it's LEED certified or LEED platinum. So between $1,000 and $5,000, depending on what they're doing. And different builders are going to use that money for different things, but it should be expected that's going to offset the cost to the homeowner ultimately. So everybody wins. It helps the builder get started. It's going to help the builder figure out how to sell these things, how to build the features in that are meaningful for the homebuyer. And then really the homebuyer wins. They get the better house and they get a bit of help getting there.
Although one of these green homes may cost the home buyer a little more than a conventional home in the beginning, it is estimated it will save the homeowner money in the long run.
Cost on green homes confuses people because the cost of a green home always is a little higher to start, but if you do it right, it's going to be lower later. And the way you measure that sometimes is different depending on how you built the house. In this house, the long-term costs are going to be comparable to a normal house because you save on your energy, you save on water, you save big time on durability because the house is just built better. It's going to last longer. And when you add that, the energy bills and your mortgage bills, all your bills, add them all together and look at them over time, you can come out with a really advanced greenhouse that costs you the same as a normal house. You have to do some more work up front. You're going to pay for that in your mortgage instead of paying your utility. And monthly, you can come out paying the same thing.
Derek Satnick with Community Renewable Energy Waterloo says there are many benefits to owning a green home.
The obvious ones that people normally think of is it uses less energy, it uses less water, it's cheaper on your bills when you live in the house. That's true. All of that's true. And that helps pay for the other pieces that are important. Some of the most important pieces that are often sort of the last ones we talk about, it's durable. It's going to last longer. It was designed to be durable. It was third-party tested to be durable. So we know it's durable and it's going to last longer. One of the biggest ones, the air quality is better in the house. The kids will have less allergy symptoms in this house. It's sort of a safer, healthier place to live. Houses aren't that terribly dangerous, but there are things you can do to improve them, and we have a lot of asthmatics in this area. We have Kitchener-Waterloo, unfortunately, is between a number of emitters, and we have our own emissions too, so we have poor air quality here. And it makes sense to work on improving that. If you live in a house with healthy indoor finishes and all the things that this house offers, it's a healthier house to live in, and the people will feel the benefit. And they'll pay for the benefit less too. It's actually cheaper now to live in an Energy Star house than to live in a normal house. And if we take that savings and put it back into a house, you get this. You get this house that's not only more energy efficient, it's also water efficient, which makes more savings. You put all those savings into healthy indoor finishes, and you get a really healthy, advanced, good place to live. It costs about the same as a normal house.
Welcome back. Joining me in the studio are Jatin Nathwani of the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Energy and Derek Satnick, who we just saw in that piece about the Renewable Energy House of CREW, which is the
Community
Renewable Energy Waterloo. Welcome, gentlemen. And first of all, let's talk a little bit about that house that was there, and what are some of the things that are in it, and why would people want to buy that house?
Do I get to go first?
Absolutely.
I'm very proud of that house. One of the exciting challenges that we were wrestling with in that house is to take all these fun ideas that are, they are fun ideas, but they're ideas, really. I've had to take something personal and private like home and improve it and try to build in energy efficiency, but do that in ways that you can actually see, because usually you can't. It's insulation in the walls. It's all the hidden things. It's air tightness. You don't see air tightness. You feel the leak sometimes, but that's the best it gets, really, in an experience. You're not going to notice the difference otherwise. So we tried to balance the hidden things that really are the cost benefits, and some visible things like recycled floors and reclaimed materials, and some sort of visible eccentric pieces to draw some attention and make it fun. The goal was to do all of that for as little cost as possible. So that was a $30,000 upgrade on that house, which on a normal sort of mid-suburban house right now is a big deal. To get it down to a price like that, we were very, very pleased.
And certainly cost is something, when it comes to something like this, cost is sort of a big issue, and we'll be talking a little bit about that later on particularly. But in terms of buying a house, when you look at $30,000 over, say, 20, 25, 30-year mortgage, however long people are spending that, it doesn't end up adding a whole lot, and yet you have savings over that month.
Yeah, the goal was, if you could balance the increase in your mortgage fee with the decrease in your utilities, then you've really achieved something. To go to LEED certified, you do that almost every time. To do LEED Platinum, we joke about it in coffees. If you were to move from a normal house to an Energy Star house, you save a coffee a day in your utility bills, your mortgage. You add the whole thing up, it's about a coffee a day savings. If you put that back in the house, you get a LEED certified. If you put another one, maybe two in, then you're going to get a LEED Platinum. So for a couple coffees a day, $50 to $70 a month is really what it adds up to.
What exactly, very quickly here, what exactly is that LEED certification in terms of houses particularly?
Sure.
We'll talk a little bit more about it as well.
It's a bit of a process to get LEED certified. It's a lot more work for the builder than it is for the homeowner. The homeowner moves into a house that has a new sticker on it. But the best way I can describe it for people who are not in the industry and not buried in all the sort of the experiences of the industry, LEED is kind of like Energy Star plus Water Star plus Good Air Quality Star plus Well-Chosen Materials Star plus Integrated in the City Properly Star. It's like 9 stars. Durability Star. It just kind of goes on and on, for about the cost of 2 Energy Stars. So we're pretty comfortable with the idea that Energy Star is better, uses less energy, and is better for people. Well, if you add Air Quality Star to that, that's sort of on the way to LEED. You add Water Star, then you're getting really close. Durability Star, and now you're pretty much there. And there's some other fun things that we can do too.
And certainly things that people need to look for if they are interested in getting this kind of home. We'll talk more about this after this break. Welcome back. We're talking about some of the issues surrounding green energy and whether or not it's worth it to consumers here in Ontario to pursue the whole goal of green energy. With me, Jatin Nathwani of the Waterloo Institute of Sustainable Energy, Derek Sapnick from the Community Renewable Energy Waterloo. And we were talking about the LEED certified home that has just been built in Kitchener. Let's talk a little bit about the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Energy, though, next. And how does it fit in with the University of Waterloo, and what exactly does it do? What's its goal?
The Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Energy comprises, in essence, 80-plus faculty members here at the University of Waterloo, and we put our arms around, in essence, the entire spectrum of complex issues around energy, and that would go from both the conventional energy system and all the issues and challenges related to that and how to make it better and so on, to where we're emerging into renewables-based cleaner energy systems such as solar, wind, bioenergy, distributed forms of energy, energy storage, conservation, efficiency improvements, and so on. So 80 colleagues with all their graduate students puts a pretty significant level of expertise on our hands to work with businesses, government, industry, and of course non-governmental organizations and community organizations to advance the thinking around how to transition to, let's call it a cleaner, a greener energy economy.
Getting into that cleaner and greener energy economy, as you put it so well. One of the things that comes up, and I think a lot of people, whether it's someone buying a house or a business owner or something like that, is looking at this and saying, "What's this going to cost me?" Yeah. And why should I be doing this now? Yeah. So maybe if you could address. Yeah,
if I may reflect on just the pictures that you show, and it's very impressive what Derek is doing. It's eminent. It's absolutely wonderful. And the way I frame it is this: that yes, there is an upfront cost, and that tends to be a barrier, and that's where there is a role for governments and other policy instruments to play to ensure that we begin to take a long-term life cycle view of the achievements. And so what you're really trying to do is if you think through for the end of life, you actually are far greater positive outcomes, both from reduction in energy use, in terms of environmental footprint, and so on. And it's just trying to find creative financial instruments, if you wish, to just allow consumers to be able to make that decision. And the kind of thing that Derek was describing, just the notion of integrated houses and how you put all elements together to kind of work together is the challenge, is where some costs come up. But in the long run, I think it's a very positive thing.
And in terms of whether it's a home or whether it's a business, certainly in various consultations that you've done with Crew and with your own business, what are some of the issues that are out there that people are facing in terms of going to green energy? What are the biggest complaints, if you will?
The whole topic of green energy, I would say the biggest issue is just understanding it, because there are so many things that are called green. Even Walmart's green, right? So what does that mean? And trying to turn that into some sensible step to move forward has been gloriously confusing. In my day job, I work at an energy consulting company, Mindscape, a local Kitchener success story. And in my volunteer time, I'm spending a lot of time with Crew and with local agencies like that. So there's quite a divergence of the discussions in both, but you see common themes. The biggest one always is, how do I start? And honestly, energy audits are the best way to start. So when you start talking about a commercial building, that looks a certain way. When you start talking about a house, that looks another way. And REAP is a local reputable firm that has done a number of, I think, 13,000 energy audits now on local homes. And the deal is, you call them, you say, I want some help with my energy bills. They come to your house, they charge you a small fee, they put a fan on the front door and they suck air out of your house, and they go around and look for leaks, and they look at your equipment in your house, and they give you a list of, here's the things that you could change. And part of the list is, here's what the government will pay you to change or help you to change. That becomes a really strong first step. And then there's other complementary programs. If we talk about Crew's specific experience, Crew has a program we call the Power Saver Network. It's kind of like a Tupperware party. We love it. It's a really simple idea, but it really works. And the idea is to get you, a couple friends, family, neighbors, whatever, in a room together with an energy kit, with a Crew-trained instructor. And the idea that they promote to you is that we can actually measure the loads that you use in your house. And we can teach you, for example, things like your TV doesn't really turn off. If you turn it off, it stays sort of kind of on. So that when you push the button, it boop, comes up quick. Because we're such a fast food culture, we don't want to wait for that screen to zoom and warm up. So even things like that we're not patient with. So we call it a turn down ratio, we call it phantom loads, but generally 25 to 30% of your electrical bill is stuff that doesn't turn off properly. So if we can teach people what those things are, you put a power bar on it and turn it off for real, it totally changes the experiment. And that's where, as Crew, we've found some great successes in trying to help normal people do normal things that really work.
Certainly, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just to add to a point or two that we've discussed so far. So Derek is talking about we're trying to influence consumer behavior towards a desired goal. We talked about perhaps government incentives that may lead us there part of the way. There's another aspect here that we should also keep in mind, and that is the standards and what sorts of standards as they evolve. There's one aspect which is, of course, fixing a house after it's been built, and that can be costly, and it has its analysis you have to do. But building new homes with tighter, better standards so that you, in fact, embed good practices, both building materials, how you construct the homes, how the home uses energy, and so on, right from step one on. So, of course, for new homes, that gets us down a path and much better results, perhaps more cost-effective effectively over the long run.
And certainly that's been done over the past number of years with things like our 2,000 homes, with Energy Star appliances and things like that. What are some of the things coming up very briefly that people can look forward to in the next few years in terms of those kinds of programs, whether it's through the government or through other technologies that are out there?
Well, if I can touch upon one or two, involved in the Ontario Smart Grid Forum. What this is a consortium or a group of people. We've led the way in terms of trying to see how the energy system will evolve over the next 20 years. And one aspect of this is what we call customer control. The idea that you provide real-time feedback of energy consumption to householders and being able to then almost merge the information technologies to the power system so people will have far greater control and ability to manage their energy use and do all sorts of things. Control of devices, away from home and so on. So that's a world that's about to come upon us, and to set that in place is a very fascinating discussion already underway, and lots of the developers are working on this.
Yep. And obviously lots of technologies. We'll talk a bit more about some of the new technologies when we come up after this break to talk a little bit more about green energy. Welcome back. We're talking about the whole issue of green energy and whether or not it's worth the cost. And to get into some of the costs and some of the things and technologies and things like that we'll be seeing, we started to talk a little bit about some of the technologies just before the break. What are some of the big things that are sort of coming up over the next couple of years?
If I may point to one, Derek, you can jump in anytime. The plug-in electric hybrid vehicles, I think, are on the verge. They're here. Next year Chevy Volt will be out, and Nissan Leaf and so on. These are early going. But this has the potential to really change the energy system the way we think about it. So what these plug-in electric vehicles will do is, in fact, you can charge them at night, which is when we don't need the energy. I make the comparison often that at 3 in the afternoon we use 26,000 megawatts of electricity in Ontario. At 2 at night we use around 14,000 megawatts. So you've got enormous capacity on the system at off-peak hours to charge these vehicles. Now they begin to displace gasoline. Then you look ahead and you say, with all the smart grid appliances and smart grid technologies and smart chargers and so on, you can begin to take the limitations of some of the renewable energy technologies such as wind and solar, and now if you have batteries and a whole bunch of cars become your kind of default storage system, if you wish, then you've got virtue on your side in terms of really using the limitations of some of the aspects of the green energy technologies, merging them with storage technologies to go down a path that really begins to clean up the province in a way that you had not imagined perhaps 3 years ago.
Certainly, and we'll talk a little bit more about storage and limitations a little bit later, but certainly one of the things that's out there right now, if you start to think, if everything's going to be run on batteries, whether it's a car, whether it's, or power is going to be stored that way, and rather than having, a gas line going into your house or something like that, how is that going to affect the electricity supply? What we're seeing right now, what is the electricity supply like right now? Are we using as much as we're creating? How is that working?
We both would love to talk for hours on that one, I'm sure. I'll plant some thoughts, and Jatin, I'm sure, will jump in. So
you can start.
Supply is a really interesting discussion in Ontario right now because much of our supply is aging and or in dire need of replacement or at least upgrade. We've got derelict equipment that we've been paying debt off of for years, and we've got a massive debt still that we're associating with some of this equipment, right? So it's a colorful discussion right now, to say the least. It has been affected by the economic slowdown over the last several years. So our supply right now far exceeds our demand, to the point that we could immediately close down all the coal generating stations in the province and we'd be fine. We've got lots of other things to work with. If you add in all the supply that we're building right now, all the renewable energy supply and other, there's quite a lot of activity in the province. And the Green Energy Act has stimulated a whole new discussion there as well. So there's lots more wind and lots more solar than there used to be. And there's a whole list of new questions and concerns that pop up there. So one of the things I think we're going to see in the near future, not even long-term future, near future, with our electricity supply, is an increasing discussion of returning to our heritage, if I can call it that. Many people don't realize we are the only jurisdiction in the world, Canada is the only jurisdiction in the world that calls electricity hydro. Hydro means water. Nobody else does that. All the rest of the world thinks that we're strange when our hydro companies provide electricity. They should provide water. So we have these interesting discussions where we realize that Ontario is actually sort of departed from its roots, and the alternative energy we're using right now is coal and nuclear. The real energy we used to use is water. So coming back to water and to biomass and to wind and to PV and a proper mix of these things so they complement well makes a lot of sense. And doing that in a way that is distributed throughout the province. So rather than having 2 or 3 large, massive points of generation, we have thousands that are small and that are sort of, it's almost like socializing or democratizing energy, where all of a sudden we have thousands of people supplying into the grid, all of them local owners, meaning that money we're paying them for their energy stays local and buys bread at the store, and then pays for the auto mechanic to fix the car, and that money just shops around in the economy before it exudes to investors and to vacations and to taxes, right? So the impact of these decisions is really not as simple as where do we buy our energy from. There's layers of other impacts that start to come up very immediately. And we're going to see the implications of all that happening shortly. So I just skimmed across 6 big icebergs of topics that we could discuss. But I'll let Jatin pick which one he wants to fill in.
Let me draw caution.
Sure.
2 or 3 important ones. Not everything will run on batteries and that quickly. Yep. It will be an evolution. Batteries are very expensive. They have the energy densities, and there are all sorts of issues with batteries, and this transition of cars and batteries and limited range distances and so on. This will take another 5 to 10 years to really begin to become part of our lives, as it were. Beyond that, we are now evolving into a system which is going to be somewhat decentralized than it has been. I don't think the centralized system is going to go away anytime soon. We are a modern province that requires reliable baseload generation and electricity, and that will continue. Electricity consumption will undoubtedly go up. In my mind, we've seen ups and downs through recession and so on, but if you look at the trajectory of electricity consumption in any economy in the world over the last 100 years, you begin to see share of electricity continue to increase. That's because electricity is a very productive form of energy and multiple uses. You can generate it in multiple different ways, and so it is that flexibility that provides it the kind of, let's call it the king of energy systems, if you wish. Now, that's the trajectory, that's where it will go. And as Derek already pointed out, Ontario's system is aging, is old, needs replacement, and the Ontario power system needs replacement, and that's well recognized. The plans are and have been in place, and they will continue to now evolve in light of current circumstances. And you're looking at anywhere from $50 to $60 billion investment over a 20-year time frame, which may sound like a large number, but it's not all that big a number in terms of on an ongoing basis. The way, if you can plan for it, we can quite readily manage the kind of challenges that are in front of us around how to shift this electricity system in the way it should be.
You mentioned the sort of aging infrastructure and things like that. In terms of new renewables, whether it's solar, wind, any of those other things, what do we need in terms of base load very quickly? And is it realistic to think that we can do that through renewable energy, or are we always going to have something that's in that sort of larger project?
Yeah.
This is where we're going to start to disagree.
Yeah. If I may go first, and then of course Derek,
we'll do this very quickly because we do have to take a break very shortly. So we'll just get a couple of quick points.
So the view I take is that renewables will certainly have to be part of the mix in Ontario in terms as we look ahead, and that's where it will have to be. It has its issues and problems. We'll discuss that in a moment. But it will have to be part of the mix.
Okay, and we'll obviously come back to this because this is going to be a pretty interesting discussion, I think, after this break. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll be back after this break to talk a little bit more about the issues with green energy. Welcome back. We're talking about some of the issues surrounding green energy and whether or not you would be willing to pay a little bit more for clean energy, renewable energy in your home. It is a little bit more expensive, at least at this point anyway. We were talking just before the break about the whole issue surrounding in terms of whether or not renewable energy is sort of a realistic alternative to what's out there now, whether it's thermal, nuclear, natural gas, sort of the traditional hydro or electricity that we've had over the past few years.
The issue and problems with renewable energies are well known, so there's nothing new in saying it's an intermittent source of energy, it's a dispersed and diffuse source of energy, and all that translates into a very high cost structure. And what that does is puts a huge challenge on how do you get that cost structure down, whether it's wind or solar, and biomass for that matter as well. So this is where you want to go, this is where you think it's desirable, but it's wishful thinking to believe that you can get that down in a real hurry. So for example, solar today is anywhere from 10 to 15 times higher cost than, and it's not there all the time when you need it. Similarly, wind is about 3 times higher in terms of cost in terms of today's power. So what do? You need to find a way to ensure that it becomes part of a system where it provides a certain role, and that over time, when its cost structure has gone down enough that it plays an increasing role. But if you force fit it in a real hurry, you could jeopardize the system.
I'm sure you have a comment on that.
To say. I'll behave. It's a rich discussion, it really is, and it's a difficult one because it's encumbered with politics. We don't pay straight energy costs in Ontario, and we basically never have. We've had it subsidized in various creative ways forever. So very pointedly, if we talk about costs, we've got to talk about compared to what, really. If we talk about solar energy at peak in the middle of the summer, that is also the same peak where we're actually importing electricity right now from the U.S., sometimes in excess of $1 per kilowatt hour. So 80 cents per kilowatt hour to solar panels on Ontario homes owned by Ontario people, versus $1 plus per kilowatt hour to an American company with foreign investors. It's cheaper to pay our own people, and the money recycles in the economy. That's not expensive. That's a good investment. And it has all kinds of other kinds of connotations that just spins out in all kinds of directions. So I'll leave that one hanging. If we're going to start talking about wind, right now we're paying up to 13, 14, 15 cents per kilowatt hour for wind. If we talk about the big wind farms, we're paying 8, 9 cents per kilowatt hour for wind. That's often compared with 5, 6 for nuclear, which is really an improper comparison. When we construct nuclear, the nuclear debt that we have that we're paying right now, the billions that are sitting on the books right now that we pay down in Ontario's hydro debt, the retired Ontario hydro debt, it costs us 25, 26 cents per kilowatt hour to build nuclear. So however we pay that, through whatever tax subsidies there's a whole discussion there that's very colorful and some of it very concerning. But the reality is it's more expensive than wind. So if we're going to compare dollar for dollar, big nuclear infrastructure with big transmission infrastructure is actually still more expensive than big wind, which is not anywhere near as big as big nuclear. And it's a lot more distributed, which means the energy is where you need it in most places most of the time. And you're going to end up having issues of intermittency. That's the big one. And many people confuse intermittency with unreliability. And it's an important distinction that many people just dastardly confuse, and it needs to be clarified. The idea of intermittency means when the wind blows, the wind turbine creates electricity. When the sun shines, the solar panel creates electricity. That's intermittent. So the solar panels, yes, they're useless at night, and they should be. Unreliable is when we have to deal with long-term forecasting and a reactor goes down for 6 months. And then we've got to deal with new baseload for 6 months because we didn't plan that one properly because it wasn't supposed to go down. Or when we're dealing with budgeting issues and we have a history of nuclear debt and we have a history of every nuclear project going 2 to 3.5 times more expensive than it should when we build it. So you could address those things. There are ways to deal with that. One of the key ways that we can deal with that in the short-term forecast, and Minister Smitherman did this to his credit, when we get bids from whatever proponent for whatever technology, if we demand, as a government, a fixed upset cost on the bid. We say, whatever your nuclear project is going to be, tell us the final total tally cost. And we get a real price. Then we can plan around that real price. Historically, we've not done that in Ontario. We've only done that once. And it was shocking, and the ministerial stepped back, and Dalton McGuinness stepped back and got scared. It was $25 billion all of a sudden. They thought it would be much less than that. They budgeted for much less than that. So when we talk about long-term energy forecasting and planning, and we start budgeting $50 to $60 billion, for what is a really important discussion. And if we, for example, spent a chunk of that, which is an expensive chunk, but spent it on a transmission corridor through the northwest of Ontario, linked up with Manitoba, spent a chunk of that connecting with Quebec, we've got really big resources in hydro-based electricity there that could meet much of our demand. And it's very dispatchable. Dispatchable is a key technical word. That means you can turn it on and off when you need it. So we need more electricity. Well, we can turn on. You can actually turn off Niagara Falls. They've got gates to turn it off. If you haven't taken the tour, it's quite something to see. And they apparently have only ever once shut off Niagara Falls. It was a big tourist disaster. But so we can do this kind of stuff. If we spend our money on transmission, that would make a huge difference. And then if we do that, it enables the private sector to step forward. So we're not spending 50, 60 billion in public funds anymore. We're letting the private sector use things like the Green Energy Act and build their own systems and sell that into the grid. And it very much changes the long-term planning. I haven't spoken on conservation. That's a rich one that I'll leave hanging too. But that's
we'll get to that in a little bit. Just sort of bringing in the whole private sector idea, and perhaps you can speak a little bit to this in terms of energy policy. We have Ontario Hydro, which is, or used to be Ontario Hydro, Ontario Power Generation now. That's a Crown corporation, and we have sort of the numbers and the costs and things like that are sort of built into the Act there. But in terms of bringing in sort of private, and this is coming in the various wind farms and things like that, in terms of bringing in private, are private industries really wanting to do this, and or are we going to see maybe sort of a low cost right now, and then maybe in the future when they realize they can make money from this, then all of a sudden the prices will go up, and what do we have to be prepared for something like that?
We have seen this movie before. The desire to get the private sector seriously involved in developing generation infrastructure in the province, certainly post-2003, and the lessons are relatively clear, that there is nobody willing to take the risks on this lumpy, long-term investments in energy projects. They all look for some third party. In this case, it then turns out to be the Ontario Power Authority to write them a contract on behalf, of course, of the consumers of the province, so that they will actually step up and invest in the generation facilities. And that goes from gas to wind to just about anything else that has been built in the province in the last 6 years. So there has been a great amount of effort done to, in fact, spur and have private sector investment come into the province. But at the end of the day, they're all simply looking for a contract from some agency that would take the risk off the table. So we had much talk about how much the private sector would build, and it didn't really come on.
Okay, we'll talk a bit more about that after we come back from this break, and when we talk a little bit more about green energy here in Ontario. Welcome back. We're talking about some of the issues with turning to green energy, looking a little bit at the history of where we've come from, how we got to where we are today. Let's go back, a few years, 20 or so years to, and how did we get to where we are? Why do we have that debt retirement charge? Why do we have some of the other issues that we have today?
Well, if I may start, it's very simple and much wisdom. The fathers of the electricity system of Ontario had a very clear idea that power was going to be produced in Ontario for the benefit of people of Ontario at cost. And this is Adam Beck and onwards. So that's how the system was designed, and it served Ontario well because that was going to be part of the basis of economic development of Ontario. That worked well. Until we hit the 70s and 80s with the commitment to nuclear, some of the cost overruns around nuclear, which ultimately got incorporated into the system and so on. But at that point became the basis for saying, let's try and figure out how to change this system, and we went into a whole restructuring of attempt to break up the Ontario Hydro, privatize the system, which really didn't come to pass at the end of the day because there was a reversal. We ran into a demand-supply imbalance in 2003 around the time of the blackout, and then we went back to, again, in essence, a planned system that we know. The notion of the stranded debt arises only when you take the proposition that you wanted to privatize and corporatize the old Ontario Hydro into new entities, and then you had to take some debt off to be able to make them as corporate entities. And that's where the issue came up in terms of how you're carrying the debt today.
Certainly, if you talk to almost anybody about a hydro bill, it's going to be a contentious issue, whether it's smart meters, whether it's paying or hearing that people are getting paid 80 cents for solar or whatever like that, and how is that paying in? Whether you're hearing numbers like a 46% increase in hydro rates over the next however many years. That's certainly got to be one of the most contentious issues. And you mentioned as well the blackout, and I remember around that time there was also an issue with wanting to change the pricing structure at that time, and there was a big outcry at that time as well, and I believe rebates as well. How does the consumer sort of play into all this?
The consumer gets the butt end of every joke in this sector. The consumer is the greatest challenge, because the consumer ultimately is the reason we have a power system, and all the planning issues have to focus on the consumer. But of course that leaves all of the encumbrances and all the political struggles in between the real system that works and the consumer. So we have all these pricing structures that may or may not have any bearing on reality anymore, and there's pieces of it that are real. But there's Gordon Miller, the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, likes to talk about truthiness. The power sector is a real good example of a sector that has a bunch of truth and a bunch of truthiness. It's sort of close enough that people call it truth, but it's just truthiness. There's really no meat in it. So when you start talking about where our electricity rate's going in the next 20, 30 years, it's genie talk. It's crystal ball talk, because all of us are doing the best we can to understand that, but it is forecasting, and forecasting is what it is. There's only so much certainty in the numbers. So Professor Nathwani and I have very different opinions on what the load profile might look like in 20 years and how much demand we may actually have. And that's characteristic of the industry. There's a diverse set of opinions on that. One of the greatest influences over that will be our conservation targets and what kind of effort we're willing to put into conservation targets. And the general consumer usually doesn't understand the cost associated with conservation. It's sort of backwards thinking, because you're paying to use less. It's sort of, where does that money go? How does that make sense? But if we're going to put money into conservation programs, you do have to fund them. Conservation ends up costing us about a seventh, maybe a tenth of what generation costs in most cases, when done well. When done well. That's a problematic discussion, but when done well.
Yeah, let me. You asked the question around the consumer. First, I'll agree with Derek that conservation makes eminent sense. More of it that we can do, more effectively that we can do. Go for it. No argument. It's cost effective. But what does the consumer want? And I think we should not delude ourselves with this pricing mechanisms and playing with consumers. And they want reliable electricity. They want it to be affordable.
Yeah, at a fair price.
In terms of, they're prepared to take cost increases as we are with other things over time. They despise volatility. They do not like the idea that price goes up and down and so on. We saw that when the market opened and the consumer could not put up with volatility. In fact, that's when the whole thing went back. So playing with prices, and there are those who say, well, raise the price enough so that consumers will consume less. Is, from a theoretical perspective, sounds very elegant. Try playing that in the consumer market and you might just lose the government. So you might be very careful when you go there and try and understand the implications of what it is that you think the consumer wants and what it is that you want them to do.
Certainly you mentioned, try saying that someone would be willing to pay that, but when it actually, when the rubber hits the road there, and that hydro bill comes in, people are shocked and outraged, and that comes down to sort of political will and things like that. Is the government going in the right direction right now, or is this something that's nobody can ever really do properly, completely?
Well, I have two small issues here. The first part, in terms of the cost pressures that you are seeing on your bill right now, arise from a number of factors. One, which is the HST, that's obvious. Yes. The other major one is certain decisions made by the Ontario Energy Board around the returns of equity to the utilities and so on, so that's made it a little richer for the utilities. And so that will see some pressure. The investments that the utilities have made and have been made to make on trying to incorporate renewable energy generation is putting added cost pressure on it. And then the tariff structure that we have under the Green Energy Act will put is not shown up yet because not much has been incorporated into the system yet. But if you stay the path, we'll see an enormous explosion of cost, and that might become a concern to the government over time.
And that's for the solar that's being sold back into
but
the grid.
But it hasn't shown up yet. It will if the penetration becomes very significant at the cost levels to which they are subsidized today.
So let's give that an example. And if we look in Germany and we see the exact cost that they've really experienced, it works out to a couple cents per kilowatt hour. If we talk about comparing a remarkable green energy penetration, really, is what it would be in Ontario, in a very, very short time frame over the next, say, 5 years. And if we were able to substantially cut back on all other load factors in the grid and replace a bunch of them with renewable energy, we might see 2, maybe 3 cents a kilowatt hour, might. Yeah. And we likely will see that increase either way. This is the thing to understand. Green energy is not a bad guy here. Nuclear debt, transmission debt, all these things will make the same increase either way. So I would rather do it in green energy.
And certainly, as you mentioned, there are other things, HST and things like that, that play into all this. We'll talk a little bit more about this and some of the technologies, some of the shortcomings of some of the technologies, maybe a few myths too. When we come back after this break, I invite you to join me to hear a little bit more about green energy. Welcome back. We're talking about some of the issues surrounding green energy with Jatin Nathwani of the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Energy and Derek Satnick from the Community Renewable Energy Waterloo, and also Mindscape Innovations, which is an energy consulting company. Let's talk a little bit about some of the green energy out there, some of the shortcomings, some of the problems. One of the things I remember is driving along the Gardiner Expressway, seeing the wind turbine down at the X. And it has a light on top for an aircraft, so that aircraft don't run into it. But the day I drove by, it wasn't turning at all. So I'm thinking to myself, that's actually a net user of electricity rather than a generator of electricity. Certainly, that downtime has got to be an issue, and people get concerned about that.
It's funny. It's an image question, and a lot of it has to do with public education and public understanding. So the light on the top, yes, it needs to be there. If you compare how often that light's going to be running compared to how much energy that comes out of the turbine, that's relevant. And if you ever had a problem with that turbine not making enough, you'd have other problems to deal with. We talk about things like duty cycle and utility ratios. The average wind turbine in Ontario should be spinning 28% of the time. You should see it stopped a lot of the time. It should be spinning more at night and in sort of set and sunrise and sunset times when the weather is changing. When the pressures in the air change, that's when you get the wind, that's when the turbine's going to spin. So, dry, still, sunny days, it should be dead. It shouldn't be doing anything, which is exactly the reason why you want to have geographic dispersity when you're leaning on wind. You need to, if the wind's not blowing in the south, it usually is blowing in the north. If it's not in the east, it is in the west. So, wind is easier when there's a lot of it. A lot of it shouldn't usually be more than 20-30%, but you can get up to 20-30% when it's planned right. The catch is if you're going to use an intermittent source like wind to generate electricity, you have to have dispatchable sources to complement it so that when you need it and don't have it, you can make up the difference. So that's when we get into system planning and talking about complementing
Let me make one or two points around wind. Its performance has been less than stellar.
Yeah, it depends on the site,
and the 26 or 28% average annual capacity factor that Derek cites is correct, but not coincident with peak time. So what that means is when you really need it, it's not there. It's barely there 6-8% of the time. And we've looked at data around the world, including Germany and just about anywhere else where you've had large wind penetration. So it's not only just the average capacity factor, which is very low, or generally quite low compared to base load, but it is not there when you need it. And so what that does is you need backup generation. In Ontario, it turns out to be default is natural gas. So once you then say that you're going to build a large amount of wind generation capacity in Ontario, it really becomes a stalking horse for gas. And so now you undo, in essence, the coal decision you've done by generating vast amounts of natural gas generation, which is not particularly a smart thing to do. And gas is cleaner than coal, but if you do twice as much, then you're back to where you were in terms of coal generation. So you've got to be very careful in terms of how you integrate this, where the transmission lines go and where those costs are, and so on. So you cannot just simply take it at face value and say, because it's green, therefore it's good, and so on.
And a lot of things that have to be taken into account in terms of the amount of time that it's actually running. Is just that whether it's 6 or 8%, or the optimum sort of around 30-ish%. But at the wrong time, maybe.
And at 2 in the morning, so it's not needed.
That's where we introduce other technologies, and you start seeing things like combined heat and power instead of natural gas. So you're using basically natural gas, but it's from a greener, cleaner source. A lot of people don't realize natural gas, that refined pure methane, is 1% more pure than cow farts. It's the same stuff. So if we can talk about combined heat and power, and if we can do that in sensible scale, with farms all over the place, with various feedstocks all over the place, biomass is a complicated science. There are many ways to do it right. There are many ways to do it wrong. It is its own field, and there are very respectable professionals in that field. So, to Jatin's point, it's valid to say you don't just suddenly introduce a whole new factor and do lots of it. You've got to plan it and you've got to complement it. So the idea behind the Green Energy Act was to do that, was to open all these tranches of different inputs to the system. Ontario has a big system. If you put a lot of wind turbines in, it doesn't dent it. It really doesn't. If we suddenly put thousands of turbines in, yes, it would dent it, and it would be something to be concerned about. But we can't do that. We don't have the transmission capacity for it. And any capacity we do have gets locked up in nuclear deals because they're much bigger. So it's really not a concern yet. It's fair to say it will be. So it does need to take some planning. And one of the ways to plan that is to say we also want combined heat and power. So there is a clean energy program. And another way is to say we want biomass. So that shows up in the Green Energy Act. There are several competing factors at play here. And it's a bit of an art and a science to try to compare those properly and to integrate them properly. So,
bioenergy, particularly as it relates to agricultural waste and or waste-related matters, makes eminent sense. It is really truly because you deal with the question of groundwater quality issues arising in farm operations and so on. So if you have biogas digesters distributed as they may be, connected onto the system that provide both heat and electricity, make great sense, and to the extent that there are some incentives provided to get that part of the system going is particularly good, and the cost structure is not so enormously out of hand as compared to perhaps solar, for example.
And certainly you're talking about spreading things out. The distribution system isn't as centralized as it was. Does that play a role in terms of getting that electricity to the grid, and then or is that opening up sort of a whole new can of worms when you start talking about those kinds of things?
Can be a blessing and a curse, and it depends to the extent that it forces a larger investment in upgrades to the distribution network and the transmission network. So you've got to plan it very carefully. But because it's a localized source, it also adds actually resilience and reliability to the system. And so therefore you've got to really look at it from a system-specific perspective as opposed to make any wide generalizations.
It will have a lot of impact on how we do our maintenance and upgrades over the next period of time. Yeah. So one of the challenges that we have, for example, if you look at some of the rural villages and cities across the southwestern Ontario peninsulas, and try to figure out how you're going to deal with renewable energy generation that goes in at the end of a new feeder, that's where we've run into challenges. We've got a big wire that comes out of the Bruce, and it gets smaller as you go. So what happens if you put something big on the wrong end of that wire? That's when we have to start replanning.
And it sounds like this could be an entirely new show at some point on this. I'd like to thank both of you for joining me here in the studio tonight to talk about this. There's certainly a whole lot more that we could be talking about. Join me tomorrow night when we're back here in the studio to Talk Local. We'll be talking a little bit about the digital hub and Communitech here in Kitchener that's been set up with the University of Waterloo. I look forward to hearing your questions and comments regarding that tomorrow night. Join me then.